You can make the argument that humans are voyeurs by nature, even when it comes to things they don't want to see. The natural urge of curiosity can be all-consuming, and if the internet is the collection of humankind's enjoyments, fantasies, fears, and thoughts, then shock sites show us just the most disgusting underbelly of true human nature. This is a deep dive into shock sites. You guys asked for this.
Internet carnage.
Shock sites do just as implied shock you. Clicking a possibly unassuming link, you will be met with some of the most vile digital material shoved in front of your eyes. And these materials can vary a great degree, from as simple as a goatsy to a brutal cartel beheading video. These sites give users a sudden shock, feeling of violation, disbelief, totally interrupting whatever your online goal originally was. Eye bleach, if you will. The early internet was much freer space where you could have websites hosting pretty much whatever your heart desired to a degree. And this degree involved beheadings, downstairs being put into meat grinders, and even tricking your friends into watching meat spin while Dead or Alive plays. The increase of social knowledge surrounding these sites led to total infamy online, as well as a hell of a lot of real-life murders, court cases, and a group of and oversensitized individuals that were fed this content non-stop. Of course, I'm gonna talk heavy hitters, Rotten, Ogrish, best score. I'm gonna, cover our bases, but I'm also gonna talk to you about a lot of lesser known sites and some of our more infamous one-off sites. And of course, everyone's favorite when I talk about the ethics and possible psychology behind all of this content. And with that, there was a warning at the beginning. This is your last and final warning before we start the ride on shock sites. If you think anything is possibly upsetting to you, you're just not sure if this is content you need to see, hear, or watch right now, please go click on something else. I never have the intention of making anyone upset or uncomfortable or, putting anyone in anguish over things I talk about. So, if you think anything fictional or real surrounding really intense topics like this will upset you, now is your time to leave. I will see you in the next video. It'll be a lot more chill, okay? And with that, I'm gonna have you buckle in, and before that, you need to hit the subscribe button, because 80% of my viewers are not subscribed. So subscribe, goddammit, you guys are making me look bad. Alright, with that, let's get into it, and there's nowhere better to start this conversation than with Rotten.com.
Of Americans own a personal computer. If you're one of them, you can now glimpse the future with nothing more than a modem, a phone line, and a few dollars a month.
Established in 1996 by a developer named Thomas Dell, better known online as Soylent, Rotten was created to establish free speech as internet censorship was on the rise and laws and regulations were starting to come into creation to restrict, limit, or just completely outright ban certain content being hosted online. The layout of Rotten.com was extremely simple. There were no image previews or thumbnails. It was a collection of blue link text that you would click and open to who knows what type of image. Sometimes it would be a gag image of some dude's nuts in a predicament, but more often than not, you would click onto absolute visceral gore imagery. One of the taglines of Rotten.com was an archive of disturbing illustration. And disturbing it was. On Rotten.com, you would find images of beheadings, crime scenes, accidents, medical deformities, diseases, literally anything under the wheelhouse of what would be shocking to an individual. I remember the last thing I ever saw on Rotten.com was a child torso during autopsy, which will now forever be burned into my head as the time I saw it when I was 11 years old, so thanks Soylent for that. Simply put, if it was gross, shocking, or related to death and or gore, you could find it on Rotten.com. And as I mentioned, it was a bit of a grab bag. Using the site, there'd be a very brief, usually most times somewhat comedic description of what the link would lead to, but it never had any clear explanation of what you were about to view. And that for this site was seen as a plus side. It created some bit of intrigue to users, and or it was a great way to mess with your friends. You would say, hey, go click this unassuming link, and they'd be met with literal eye bleach. And I think this is a really big precursor to Reddit 50/50, which we will touch on later, on the entire concept of, you might click on this and it's not going to be something really bad, or you're going to click on it and it's going to be something really, really bad. The large majority of images and later videos that were uploaded onto Rotten.com were self-uploads by users and or fans of the site, and this led to a lot of mislabelments of location, cause of death, what the picture actually depicted, just a typical normal game of telephone. Ron.com had an immensely dedicated fan base of visitors. A lot of them proclaimed themselves to be rotteneers, which is mocking the Disney whole Mickey Mouse Musketeers, right? Musketeers, Rottenteers, yes, that is it, which, I'm sure Disney loved that. Most of these fans were dedicated to standing the fight of censorship to its absolute core. By 2001, Ron.com would receive about 200,000 visitors a day, according to some articles. Soon enough, Ron.com became kind of a media house in its own right, spawning a hell of a lot of sister sites like Rotten News and or known as Rotten Daily, which, as it sounds, was a news site that featured a lot of articles and write-ups about current things happening, usually surrounding, gore or intense and shocking materials, just like the regular Ron.com site. A lot of these were user submissions that were then edited and uploaded onto Rotten News, and this had its own comment and forum section where people would discuss things and usually tell their own relatable stories and or share their own personal gore. As I just said, Rotten had a lot of sister sites it created, but I think the most infamous one and the one that actually lasted the longest was Celebrity Morgue, which ties into the first giant media sensationalized thing Rotten did that got it on the map. It was the claim that they had photos of Princess Diana post-mortem that were given to the site by an alleged medical personnel that was in charge of recovering her body from the fatal car accident that would take her life. The photo was later debunked, but this garnered them major media attention, as well as the Howard Stern show praising its existence. These happenings and more subsequently put it on the map into the knowledge of regular Joes, and quite possibly part of how many cease and desist cases Soylent and Rotten would find themselves in. I would argue the most notorious one of these cease and desist would come from the Burlington Coat Factory. Soylent was really in the habit of buying up domains, at times buying domains before he even knew what he was going to do with them, which is actually what happened with Ron.com. He had a program that would search through one-name websites that were available for purchase, and if it sounded cool enough, he would buy it. He literally bought Rotten because it popped up, and I think he even posted, was like, what the hell should I do with this? And that's how Ron.com was even spawned and born, but one of these domains he would purchase would be trenchcoat.org. Can you take a wild guess at where this is going? This site was made to be a parody fake shock site as the official page for the Trenchcoat Mafia, which is in relation to the 1999 Columbine High School massacre shooting, where two students, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, jokingly went by with their friends, the Trenchcoat Mafia, proceeded to go on campus and kill a total of 13 individuals, including themselves. And you may be asking, why would Burlington Coat Factory involve themselves? They're just talking about coats. That's because at the bottom of the website, there was a button that said, click here to see who to sue. And when you click that, it redirected you to the official Burlington Coat Factory website. And yeah, you can assume they weren't super pumped on this. And in the names of big brands that had issues with Rotten, they'd actually be a bit lower because Coca-Cola themselves went after Rotten.com for having an image of a woman putting a Coca-Cola bottle somewhere where the sun don't shine with the label there, and yeah, they also were not too happy about this. On top of that, the Pillsbury Dough Company did not like a photo of, I believe it was the Doughboy cooking a woman. It was something along those lines, and they also weren't really pumped about that. Also, I have this nice fun and inflection right now because we're not going to be able to have fun inflections later, and at least this wasn't technically hurting anyone. At least the Coca-Cola and Pillsbury Doughboy, okay? Soylent would find himself stuck in a constant back and forth with the so-called moral high authority of the internet. Rotten found itself as the pillar of controversy in 1999 over the Child Online Protection Act. Even someone testifying in front of Congress using Rotten as the poster child for the violent and bloody horrors that need to be shielded from children. Which is just constantly glancing over the large, key, and highly important fact of genuinely supervising children on the internet. This is one of those things that just puts blame onto others. And again, we're going to talk about the ethics and morality of shock sites even existing, okay? I'm not saying, oh, these should be free willy-nilly, but I'm just saying all of these acts that were taking place in this time and still try to get put in place nowadays aren't really for the genuine protection of children. They're to make it so people don't have to monitor children online. No matter what, you need to monitor children online. Period, point blank. Along with this and a mass amount of other legal complaints, Soylent eventually gave them a bit of leeway, with some images on the site now requiring the user to provide an adult verification ID number to unlock and view them. But ultimately, the biggest trouble would actually be with European government officials, not even what was going on in America with the Child Protection Acts. In particular, one thing that stood out and got Soylent investigated by Scotland Yard and the FBI was pictures of the performance artist Zhu Yu and his performance act of creating a fake fetus and cooking it, preparing it, and proceeding to eat it for a series of photographs for an art show that was never actually seen, which I touch on this a lot more in depth on the cannibalism video, so go check that out. As well as this, the German Family Ministry were sending threatening letters directly to Soylent, pointing out that there were offensive materials in what they deemed so, and that he needed to remove them from the site to protect children. And if minors were able to download the site from Germany, he would be prosecuted for it. Now, with Rotten.com and almost all the sites we're going to talk about after, this entire crackdown and pushdown on censoring and banning them is an impeachment on free speech and, just plays into the whole idea of internet censorship, which I obviously am not a fan of, which we're gonna get into it later, okay? I know everyone's like, oh, you keep saying we're gonna get stuff later. Yeah, that's how you boost people staying into the video, okay? I promise. But I know you want to hear about all the nastiness first. Let's be so real with each other. Like we've discussed before, extreme horror Mondo films, the taboo that had been launched into the forefront once media could be distributed and created. The taste for extreme and arguably disgusting materials has always existed, but the internet just gave it the biggest legs it could ever grow to run on. Death on a Platter, which had become an extremely sensitive subject for the general public, as over time the treatment of death had and has shifted greatly in a different direction than before. As soon as Rotten appeared, there were thousands of sites like it. Just like the site Ogrish, which is better known as its later semi-rebranded site LiveLeak. Ogrish was established in 2000, just 4 years after Rotten.com. It was believed at one point to be headed in part by a Dutchman named Dan Klinker, as Ogrish had a staff, but it was largely anonymous and extremely hard to find who was in charge or involved where and when. Ogrish eventually took a slightly different approach to the shock content they had. It started originally with things like car accidents and murder, crime scene photos, what you can call typical variety shock site content, and they shifted to focusing on what news channels wouldn't show. Really gruesome war crimes, accidents, or even terrorist execution. Now, of course, these were definitely on Rotten and similar sites, but Ogrish kind of took the forefront focus as an uncensored news site, which we will see as an extremely common trope with all of these shock sites coming on. In a way, they were bringing a kind of more serious tone and just less explicitly trolling people. In the heyday, they claimed to receive between 125,000 to 200,000 visitors on the site daily. Ogrish's slogan was, "Can you handle life?" stamping them as showing you the real world, showing you uncensored, violent, tasteless, senseless gore, but this was real occurrences actually happening in the world and you need to know about it. Similarly to Rotten, Ogrish would take user submissions for content by email, or even at times direct uploads onto the site. Klinker, in one of the very few, if only documented interviews, said most of the user content was self-made, or people with access to things of that nature, like cops or medics, which there has been an extremely long-standing history of people in positions of employment that will do this. They will take pictures of things they are not supposed to take of, and they will either text it with each other or share it around, or even at times sell it, especially when it comes to celebrities post-mortem. In more recent history, when Kobe's helicopter went down and people who were on the scene that were professionals supposed to be helping and handling the scene took photos and sent them out, eventually leaking to the mass general public. This is a normal, unfortunately disgusting thing that happens with certain people in these fields that are near situations like this. They're one of the top suppliers of this type of content to the public. As well as, according to Klinker, quote, numerous people working almost full-time to acquire content in Southern America, India, Pakistan, etc. There are the reporters for Ogrish in those areas. Then we also have freelance writers for the magazine. Also, there are staff who often work free of charge on the forum and other areas, unquote. Like all of these legacy sites, almost all of them had at least one video or photo that gave them this sort of infamy among the rest of them. And for Ogrish, I think without a doubt, it is the video of the American contractor Nick Berg, who was beheaded in Iraq. Once this video was uploaded onto Ogrish.com, it was downloaded about 15 18 million times. Of more general internet notoriety would be a video referred to as Chechclear, which has spawned its own legends and rumors of lost media and the like. It's a video of a Russian soldier being killed by a Chechen soldier. And the sound in this video, I think, is why it has a absolute level of so-called infamy and, status online, because the people that consume this content is in large communities. Like, these are communities. All of these sites have communities, and there are current standing communities of these type of people that want to watch stuff like this, and there are infamous videos. It's like in the horror culture of, the most intense movie to watch. They have their own versions, but it's real death on film, and Chechclear is one of those videos, and I think it is because of the sound. If you have seen this video, unfortunately, you know what I'm talking about. I've also heard metal songs that have sampled this sound, and it is horrible and haunting. That is the easiest way to put the existence of Chechclear. Is if you have had to seen this or hear this, you get a trauma response to hearing the sound of it. You know exactly what it is. Outside of user submissions, one of the ways Ogrish got content was using software programs to continually skim extremist sites for new videos or images, looking for certain keywords in combination with said videos. Once finding something, it would alert over to email that it was something to look at, and if it was good enough, it would get uploaded onto the site. Along with this, they would also get tips of sites to look out for by, quote, terrorist hunting groups, unquote. This means more times than not, Ogrish would be one of the first to acquire said videos and to publish them to the so-called mainstream public. In 2006, the site would change its design from the initial dark and graphic heavy layout to a fast and semi-minimalist one, as well as replacing a forum area with the Ogrish Zoo. These changes lasted an entire day and was ultimately replaced with The Underground, a private hidden group that you could only gain access with the request of a current member or someone running it. Then 3 months later in April, this would also shut down, and the entire site was making the switch from a gore site to an explicitly uncensored news site. This all culminated to the essentially rebranding of Ogrish in November to LiveLeak. I say essentially rebranding because Ogrish shut down, LiveLeak started with the majority group that were running Ogrish, switching to LiveLeak, so it's seen as the evolution of Ogrish, essentially, and the main head for this one, or at least the main spokesperson talking on LiveLeak, was Hayden Hewitt. It essentially went back to focusing on what Ogrish was originally supposed to be, which was an uncensored news site, and if you're not surprised to hear, LiveLeak went down the same path as Ogrish and just became known as a pure gore shock site. But it wanted to show uncensored news and journalism, showing war crimes and executions in the means of fostering independent journalism. And LiveLeak's first claim to general public knowledge was in 2007 with the leak of the execution of Saddam Hussein, which was part of the site being discussed as a place to see updates from active US soldiers, as said by the actual press secretary of the White House, Tony Snow. But this, I think, also shows how good the branding was, that it was literally referred to by the White House. Like, that's how good the branding was as being an independent news site, which, to be fair, that's the weird thing with all of this stuff, is like, it is, like, that's actually happening, and that's real. And yeah, they're not going to show it on the general news because you kind of can't, for a slew of reasons. So once again, you're put in this weird gray area of like, this is reality, this is happening. We should know this is happening, and that comes down to the, do we really need to see it happening? Who knows? We'll get to that later. Over the years, LiveLeak would find itself into some bouts of trouble, from hosting an anti-Quran film, showing clips from a BBC program on child street violence, all the way to having the video of US journalist James Foley being beheaded by Islamic State terrorists uploaded onto the site, which ultimately led to LiveLeak banning the upload of any beheadings done by the Islamic State to be uploaded onto the platform. Which I will say, it's just a really odd wording by them, because it is like no beheadings by the Islamic terrorist state, but beheadings from anyone else was still fair game. It's Shock sites are really so curious. As of May 2021, LiveLeak has been shut down and redirects to a site called ItemFix that does not allow uploads of any excessive violence at all. Now, I think it's time. Let's take our little halftime show. Let's take our halftime break and let's look at, some lighter sites. At least we'll start with a few lighter one-off sites. There were a slew of shock sites that were really just one image, Blue Waffle, Tub Girl, Goatsy, etc., etc. I think it's a bit more interesting if we focus on more fleshed out full sites that gave you a little bit more to offer, because most shock image sites that were just one image, people didn't want to keep up with paying for the domain and stuff, so they ended up being hosted by larger shock sites like Rotten or Ogrish or LiveLeak. Is you can go and see them there instead of them just having them. And Rotten actually ended up hosting the mass slew of sites like this, like the one we're about to discuss, Bonsai Kitten. And before I get into that, I guess I'm supposed to tell you 3 times every video. Please subscribe, hit the notification bell, make sure to do that. Subscribers really mean the most, so please subscribe. Now, Bonsai Kittens would end up in the library of Rotten. It was quite obviously a joke site that was self-proclaimed as dedicated to preserving the long-lost body art of body modification in house pets. They offer the sale of kittens that they home grow into box shapes, so you can have a box-shaped kitten, or I think they even take custom orders of kittens you can buy in a certain shape. And according to the website, which is still active today and you can visit it, quote, "At only a few weeks of age, a kitten's bones have not yet hardened and become osseous. They are extremely soft and springy. In fact, if you take a week-old kitten and throw it to the floor, it will actually bounce. We do not recommend that you try this at home. The kitten may bounce under the furniture and be difficult to retrieve, as well as covered in unsightly household dust. However, the flexibility of the kitten's skeletons means that if the bones are gently warped at this early age, they can be molded into any desired shape. At Bonsai Kitten, we achieve this by placing the kitten into a rigid vessel soon after birth, and allowing the young cat to grow out its formative time entirely within the container. The kitten essentially grows into the shape of the vessel. Once the cat is fully developed, it is removed, or the vessel broken to remove it, producing the lovable, furry pet you've always wanted, but it remains in the shape you've always dreamed of. There is virtually no limit to the eventual shape of your pet." Unquote. Quite obviously, this is a joke site. You spend 5 seconds on this, it's a joke site. I will now self-admit, when I was a child, I saw this and thought it was real, and it made me very upset as a cat-loving, 10-year-old, but it's quite very obviously a joke site. The site was actually made by an MIT student, and it got its big boom as being posted on Cruel.com as the cruel site of the day, although it was quickly removed by the outpouring of people freaking out and condemning it, believing it was real, even the FBI having to come out and state this is not a real site, this is a joke site, as well as a slew of humane societies, because people were reporting this. They genuinely thought this was real, but at this time in the internet, people didn't really understand how much people will mess with people to the degree, so people were freaking out about this, and even some animal rights activists didn't step down on the fact that even though it is fictional, it is in a way promoting violence against animals, which, joke or not, isn't cool, which, fair enough. Everyone knows, one of the first general rules of internet is don't f with cats, which, don't worry, when we get to best score, we're talking about Luca. Back to sprinkle you with a little nasty, there is a site in particular that I do recall called Monkey Sugar. Monkey Sugar was a very simple site with a flash animation with green text stating, "The following are examples of things which are most certainly not Monkey Sugar." It was originally a typical shock site, but the main focus of this was that it was an animation. You really couldn't click or interact or do anything. It would just animate flash style images to you of, diseases, autopsies, medical deformities, post-mortem photos, the usual suspects. But later, the screen of text would be accompanied with a robot woman explaining what monkey sugar is. Quote, "Anything that makes one physically satisfied. By extension, anything good or desirable." Unquote. And then it would proceed with all the nasty images just auto-flashed onto you immediately and quickly. Also a lot of NSFW stuff. I will say, all of these sites also had a lot of that, but you know what platform we're on. Can't really chat about you with that, but for some reason I can talk to you about beheadings. Ha ha ha, that makes sense. Woo. I'm just kidding. Please, I'm just kidding. Please, I'm just kidding. Do not. I can't handle another incident. I can't. Let's get back a little light. Meat spin. Meatspin was the Casablanca of messing with someone. You know, in a way it is extremely lighthearted and doesn't hurt anybody. It was tricking people onto clicking a site where meat would spin, accompanied by the absolute banger song You Spin Me Right Round from the band Dead or Alive. Rest in peace, Pete Burns. One of my biggest life icons. The GIF itself originally was from a site called Ride Spinners, where the 3-6 Mafia song Ride Spinners plays. The site also featured a counter at the bottom that once you hit 45 or over of spins on the site, text would pop up saying, "You are officially gay," with, you know, the little emoticon smiley face. And Meatspin actually kept relevance for like a really insane amount of time, and it had a resurgence for my general age group due to the fact that in 2013 a student at the Florida State University of Panama City had the school's website redirect to meatspin.com. He of course said this was to prove how low the security of the school actually was for their website, which they definitely raised the security after this, but ultimately he got in a bunch of trouble, and I think they kicked him out of the school, which is, you know, really unfortunate. But he kind of revived and kept the longevity of Meatspin. This was almost 10 years after the initial reception of it, so, you know, he's like a hipster for me in that way. Unfortunately, back to really horrible stuff, Running the Gauntlet was an internet challenge consisting of 20 videos that would progressively get worse as you went on, which was you running the gauntlet. At one point, the gauntlet had about 6.9 million page viewers, with users from quite literally everywhere in the world. The concept was that by the end, you had seen it all and would be desensitized to the rest of the internet. From accidents with bone breaking, animal cruelty, all the way to infant deaths. It was launched online around 2015, which means it created an absolute slew of internet reactions, particularly here on YouTube, where a phenomena of people running the gauntlet and seeing if they could really make it through. Now, I think this is a really phenomenal example of the fact that there is tastes and tolerance levels within people that consume shock and or gore content. And that there's almost a hierarchy surrounding it, of the fact of, I watch X, not Y, so that doesn't make me Z. I touched on this in the necrophilia video, is that it is a genuine thing within the categories of necrophiles that some will feel superiority to other necrophiles because they do X and they don't do Y. And I think it is a big thing within gore people, from what I have seen and heard involving stuff, is there is hierarchy surrounding what your tastes are, and that makes you less bad than the other person. Like, I only watch car wrecks, I don't watch beheadings. And you know how absolutely insane that's sounds for me to say to you, but it's a thing that occurs. Of course, it's not everybody, but there is this level of hierarchy and superiority and justification within extremities of, you know, I'm not as extreme as the next guy, so I'm not as bad, or what I do isn't as whatever. And I think Running the Gauntlet is definitely, you know, a part of that. Is it's like, well, you know, I can't get past that. Like, I can't watch stuff like that. It's like you're, you know, it's your hard line that can also set you as, you know, better than, in a way. And without a doubt, I think Running the Gauntlet and Rotten had like a love child together. It was Reddit 50/50, which to my knowledge is still an up and running subreddit, which if you are not aware, this was also, talk about like an internet situation. This like took way more reactions and stuff than Running the Gauntlet. Reddit 50/50 was, you would have a Reddit link and it would be 50/50 options. It would be, you're either going to see a basket full of kittens, or you're going to see, like, open heart surgery. You're either going to see a double rainbow, or you're going to see a, like, cancerous cyst being cut open. It was quite literally a 50/50 shot at seeing something super NSFL, not safe for life, or just the most mundane whatever, doesn't matter thing. And this is really interesting to me because this was an internet challenge. This was a phenomenon. Like, if you go on to YouTube and you type in Reddit 50/50, you would possibly be surprised at the people you would see who made content and videos surrounding this, because once again, we go through these waves of oversensitization and desensitization and what is shocking and not shocking, what's socially acceptable, not socially acceptable. And it changes probably at such a more rapid rate nowadays, but it was at one point seen as so flazé to see victims of car accidents or seeing, a cool sticker that people like Markiplier were doing this publicly on platforms. And, now I think we are at the end or in the cusp, in the during of the not even over, but like people being like, this is not cool to watch situation. So, Reddit 50/50 is really intriguing to me because I, as a youth perusing YouTube, saw so many creators make content surrounding this, and you really boil it down, that's just a shock for them. It's a shock for them with a game, because, hey, you might not see anything horrible, but your odds are 50/50, and anyone who's on that's going to click more than one link at a time, and you are going to see NSFLW content. I don't think I've stressed enough on the fact that there were literally thousands of sites like these. We just only have a few in the general zeitgeist, mostly due to infamous things that occurred, but a lot of these shock sites would have super innocuous names that you really wouldn't know what you were clicking onto, in particular, like the site Steak and Cheese. Steak and Cheese was a site that was very among the likes of Rotten, and with what I can find, similar timing started around 1996. But this site, and like most other shock sites, have been completely lost to time. Looking up this site, which I want you to know right now, the user domain has been bought and is now an NSFW page, so please be careful looking at anything all the time, please, okay? But because this is one of those sites that just didn't have a mass point of infamy, like Ogrish having a Nick Berg, or the Chech Clear, or Rotten having the so-called corpse of Diana, many of these sites, like Steak and Cheese, just fell off. No one really archived them. No one even really particularly super remembers them. And all we can find of these sites are people reminiscing about them, or even trying to find people that remember this site, and you'll find people in the comments being like, absolutely, I remember that. Even throwing out names of well-known users on the site, and people absolutely remembering that individual as well. And it is something that is just absolutely, it's just lost to time completely. Along with this was a really big site called Consumption Junction, which, once again, the domain has been bought. Please, please. And this one, from what I can find, at least from people discussing it, because once again, I cannot find archives of either of these sites or a slew of other sites. At one point, it was estimated that there were about 9,000 sites that were at the caliber of Rotten, or at least in the similar realm of whole user interfaces, content, and all that just surrounding shock. From what I can see about Consumption was people held this site kind of in a hard regard. Like, people would say, I saw shocking, horrible stuff on there, but I always found like genuine, interesting content, and people there had like really big community. Like, there was a lot about the whole community on Consumption, and that, from what I can see, they had more like, I don't know, I wasn't there. Frankly, I probably wasn't even alive when everyone was doing all this, but from what I could see, this one was held in a very high regard, and people enjoyed it. And I think it is a fascinating enigma of how big shock sites were and how many there were, and which ones stayed around and why. Because off the top of my head, everyone and their mother knows Rotten, and in more recent times, everyone's like, oh yeah, best gore, but like, there were quite literally, they estimate 9,000, I would estimate more than that, of these sites. But in the general cultural zeitgeist of the internet that has withheld the time, it's really just like 5 sites people remember. And now, talking about mass amounts of scandal creating infamy, I think one of, if not the craziest, biggest site that ever got a scandal, including the owner being arrested in conjunction with the content that was hosted, is the Canadian site Best Gore. Best Gore was one of the more standing later ones, and it is one I personally have the most self-familiarity with, because this site was launched in 2008 and stayed around until 2020. It had, on average, 10 to 15 million page views per month. It is best known for the header on the website, which was a real photo of a woman on a spit. Best Gore had the absolute best documentary section, and that documentary section is honestly the reason I am here on this platform and is why I know a slew of things, why I know anything about cannibalism, necrophilia. In a way, it gave me a new sense of curiosity, which can be absolutely horrible to me. Who knows how I am going to end up from all of this stuff, but I, like, not to give a gore site its props, but the documentary section on here I would spend hours on. I watched almost every documentary they had on this site because it was kind of the only content on there I could reasonably stomach, and it kind of opened my head up in a new way. And a lot of these documentaries are completely lost. I have tried so much to seek out certain ones using keywords and images and stuff like that, but a lot of things they hosted on the site were completely foreign, and they're just completely lost. And Best Gore hosted, you know, typical gore content, but because it was a more later stage website, this had a lot better user interface, a lot better searchability, and just use of the site as a whole. It was an actually, like, sat down, coded, and curated website where you could go to different sections and get super niche and, you know, go in forums and communities and comments and, you know, have whole profiles and stuff. And, you know, typical stuff, just a lot better organized. But as I had just mentioned, Best Gore would find itself in the most genuine legal trouble, leading to the arrest of the owner, Mark, due to content hosted on the site. The content in question was the now infamous video called One Lunatic, One Ice Pick, in which one of the biggest losers that ever breathed in the entire history of man, Luca Magnotta, killed an innocent man, Jun Lin, on film. Luca Magnotta set up a camera and murdered an innocent man, proceeding to mutilate, necrophile, and dismember his corpse, all on film, while the track True Faith by New Order plays in the background. Lucas self-uploaded this 11-minute video he himself edited, clipped, and made. The Canadian government officials have implicated that they themselves got a hold of the raw footage, and that it also contains footage of Luca allegedly cannibalizing Jun's body. Jun Lin was last seen by his friends on May 24th. The video Luca created was uploaded on May 25th. As early as 10 days before the creation of the video and the murder of Jun, Luca was online advertising its existence and release. After the murder, Luca disposed of Jun Lin, except for his left foot, head, and multiple other body parts, some which are unknown to the public. He packaged the foot and sent it to the Conservative Party of Canada. He then boarded a flight to Paris under his own full legal government name. One day after the upload of the video onto Best Gore, on May 26th, a lawyer in Montana had seen the video and reported it to the Montreal police, his local police, as well as the FBI, just to be totally brushed off. The entire situation surrounding Luca creating and distributing and getting away and all of this stuff that could have led to him completely getting off of the radar should have never even come close to occurring, due to the fact that Luca already had people advocating for him being a dangerous individual that needed to be monitored and held accountable for previous cruel actions. The cruel actions in question were the fact that Luca was making animal cruelty videos involving kittens and uploading them onto YouTube. This led to animal rights activists self-investigating, tracking him down, finding out who he was to properly report him to authorities as someone who is genuinely a threat to animals and humans. And these threats were not taken properly or seriously, quite literally at all. I truly believe if animal cruelty laws were held to the same degree that even to any extent of human cruelty laws, like, I know animals and humans aren't equal to most people and in general, okay, human life is obviously more important. But if we actually held people accountable for hurting animals, I don't think Luca Magnotta would have been able to commit the murder of Jun Lin. Luca was eventually tracked down to an internet cafe where he was looking at articles about himself. The footage of him being captured is available online, and it is pretty satisfying to see. The video got onto Best Gore because Luca himself sent it to Mark to be uploaded, which was absolutely normal for shock sites and Best Gore in particular. As I mentioned, all of these sites I've mentioned to you kind of really get their base of content from user submissions. So it's not abnormal for Mark to get a video of something like this and upload it onto Vescor, not really knowing exactly what's going on with it, or when this was uploaded, most people thought this was fake. Like, especially with Luca, like, going around advertising and hyping this up, because I believe it is stated the first chunk of the clip of him on top of who's supposed to be Jun is not. It's something he spliced from a separate, like, home video where no one was murdered. So, most people watched this video when it was uploaded to Vescor and thought it was fake. Because it, like, seems fake. It's Luca Magnotta. He was, like, this desperate loser who wanted attention for anything because, like, he wasn't worth even glancing at, and he could not handle that. He was an attention whore and would do anything for it. So people seeing this video were like, man, whatever, it's not real. Now, it's not clear if Mark saw this and thought it was real or not, but, you know, he was a guy who hosted Vescor, so he uploaded it. And this actually led to Mark being arrested and charged with 1 count of corrupting public morals as part of Canada's obscenity laws. Authorities claimed he refused to remove the video by their request, while Mark himself stated, quote, "I took it down myself on my own terms without being asked. Had any such request by police to take it down, as alleged, been made, I would have just told them that the video had been down for days," unquote. Mark was released on bail and eventually was re-arrested for violating the terms of his release. Ultimately, he pleaded guilty and was charged with 3 months of house arrest and consecutively 3 months of community service. Vescor ceased operations in 2012, and if you go to the site this day, it redirects to Mark kind of answering frequently asked questions about, you know, why it doesn't exist, and does he have other sites, and ultimately, Mark was paying way more to run this than he ever got out of it. Kind of didn't want to do that stuff anymore, so he doesn't do that stuff anymore. He doesn't have other websites for you. Just Vescor has ceased operations, just like LiveLeak, Ogrish, and Rotten, and, you know, many of the others before. Now, why do people watch this? Why are there communities? Why are there fanboys and fangirls of shock content and quite literally death? It seems to be that everyone's reason is extremely individual. But, you know, we can kind of get an idea of some groupings of reasons. One of the best writings I've been able to find and read about the entire consumption of gore content is an essay by Sue Tate written in 2008. In this, she analyzed the Ogrish forums to kind of get an idea of why people watch stuff like this. And to put her entire studies and findings very, very rudimentary, she found about 4 main viewpoints, or as she refers to as them, gazes, surrounding why people will watch things like this. The first one being a moral gaze. The suffering, torture, death of the individual provides pleasure or stimulation to the viewer. And this doesn't have to be the typical sense on pleasure. It can even be the cause of humor, which is extremely prevalent in these forums and in the comment sections of videos and content like this. You will find extremely lighthearted jokes being made in the section of literal war crimes. Dr. Carl Shubs, who is a trauma and addiction specialist, when speaking about running the Gauntlet Challenge, said, quote, "People are drawn to something new and different, even if that something new and different is really repulsive. Something about the repulsion is attractive to us," unquote. And I think that is a really good way to put it. Is it's part of sensation seeking, and I myself am guilty of sensation seeking, not in this realm, but like within horror and, you know, even extreme heavy music. Is you kind of just keep seeking something out, and it is seeking a sensation, a feeling, a something. And I think a lot of us get at times with how the current standing of the world is and being overworked, and you kind of become numb and you seek a feeling, you seek a sensation. And unfortunately for some people, their sensation seeking means is repulsive content and or death content. The next thought process is the vulnerable gaze, which causes the viewer emotional and mental anguish as a result of viewing the material. I find this to be one of the absolutely most fascinating reasons that some people will watch things like this. In a way, it is in an intentional harm against themselves by watching something they know will put them in genuine turmoil. As well, it can also be a way of magnifying their pain to show some level of higher empathy. Like, kind of using it to say, I'm such a good person because I feel so horrible seeing this. It creates, once again, a level of hierarchy within itself, which this isn't everyone that kind of falls into this. This is just definitely a subsection that I find so fascinating is the self-righteousness about being accosted and disgusted by viewing things like this, which then causes them to view it. And that, as well as the people that use it as a form of harm against themselves, it is such a peculiar thought process and way to go about existence and the existence of consuming media, let alone consuming shock content. It is really crazy and interesting. Third position, the entitled gaze. This plays into the alleged existence of all of these sites having the labeling of being an uncensored news site. In this, people want to, or feel they need to see what is being allegedly hidden. There's this idea that hidden or withheld content can lead to obsession. It's like the half-told quote of "curiosity killed the cat," is that this need of knowing you can't or shouldn't or you're not allowed to see something forces you to just obsess on the concept of seeing that. And I think a film, because it's me, I have to pull a movie into something or I will explode, I guess, is I think the French film that recently came out, Red Rooms, which also I saw it. You guys can stop commenting that I need to watch it. I finally saw it and it was as good as everyone said it was. It was really immaculate. But this is part of the concept of things are withheld, so it turns into obsession. And I think this is a really phenomenal example of film because it is talking about in the film setting of a real life snuff film. So they aren't releasing the footage of said snuff film, and this one woman is so hyper fixated on being able to see it. She's showing up to the court dates of this guy, and we eventually find out she herself has acquired it via really sketchy dark web Bitcoin trading means. But it is that the fact that you can't see it causes an obsession. I find myself guilty of this once again, more in the way of foreign films I can't get a hold of versus terrorist videos, but the sentiment is there of this idea of I'm not shown it, so I must see it. And referencing back to the MIT student who faked the Bonsai Cat website, he himself stated, quote, "The dichotomy between exploiting distasteful subject matter in the guise of information and exploiting it as entertainment is artificial and hypocritical. Lurid details of human fault and misery are published in the mainstream media for exactly the same reason that certain people exchange this material informally, to titillate the viewer," unquote. And part of that is there is truth within that matter, is it really is the same stuff will get spinned to come across as a certain way when it's distributed and told by one entity versus a separate entity. But part of that is also, justification. And justification is the crux of humans doing questionable or gray things, is you must find the justification within it. And that absolutely finds the justification within it is, this is the same stuff you're going to see on Fox or CNN or da-da-da. You're just getting it real. You're getting the real cut of it. And, that plays into the entire ethics situation. And the whole thing that censorship over media and or news, which is so highly real and prevalent. It is genuinely at this point, it is just a fact that media and news are extremely highly censored, and we live in that. We live in that state. And it's kind of always been that way. We're just kind of more shoved in the face with it. And censorship is gray. Everything's gray. I love that everything's gray. I love that I can never pick a hard line on everything. That's super duper fun. But I'm obviously anti-censorship. Because, obviously. And it puts you in this weird space. Because do I want to promote people looking at shock content and or things like this? No. Absolutely not. But I also don't believe in censorship. So it's, it's the state of not promoting it, but I also can't really denounce it because I don't think we need content withheld. But it's the whole concept of should this content even exist, which is a whole separate entity in its own that I'm so beyond unqualified to even start talking about. Which, once again, I'm not qualified to talk about anything, okay? I am literally a dumb girl with internet access that can read a book or two. Please, please, always, as always I tell, go investigate yourself, have your own feelings and opinions, and make them well informed, okay? Don't just listen to garbage I spew to you sitting in my chair in my box dyed hair, okay? Lastly, there's responsive gaze. This is the I have a factual reason to watch this point. Like a soon-to-be soldier wanting to see what the war they're going into looks like, or a paramedic wanting to prepare themselves for people mutilated by accidents. It's not so much self-righteous, but in a way a self-biased confirmation and or once again justification of the consumption of the content. You know, it's this whole like, I have a reason to do this, so it's, of course I'm gonna watch this. There's a reason for me to watch this. And you know, keep talking about justification. A lot of people don't need justification for watching videos like this. I bring that up because it is the social normality surrounding it of, you know, if you find out someone's watching something like this, like if I somehow found out someone close to me was watching things like this, I would immediately, my first question would be like, why? Like, genuinely, why are you watching this? Like, what is the reason? And so most people need a reason, which a reason is a justification. And I think the responsive gaze is probably a really big one, because I've seen a lot of people in particular when it comes to gore, they say, they watch stuff and it now, you know, makes them feel like they are more prepared for things. Like they, well, I know how to be safer and stuff. Or people will advocate, well, after watching stuff on Best Gore, you know, I'm not going to drive a motorcycle. Just things of that nature of the whole responsive. And Dr. Shrubs had also stated, quote, watching the videos is not about trying to prepare for a specific event, because how likely is it a beheading will happen that they need to prepare for it? It's about a lack of control and a sense of helplessness. People want to be in control of everything, or feel like they can be, unquote. I think shock content feeds on the vulnerability of the human body. People can fester or get excitement at the violation or distraction of the human form for a myriad of reasons, from extreme acts like a goatsy or suicide. There is the intrigue of what can a body take, and for some, the concept of they have to see it to believe it. As said by psychoanalyst Makita Brotman, quote, for anything to be considered truly horrifying, it has to be seen, and preferably rendered as graphic and lifelike in detail as possible, unquote. And what is more lifelike than genuine reality? Real videos of, and or photos of death, accidents, horror, like literally just the worst things that can happen to humans. There's nothing more real than that. And I'm making a point to actually quote and use a lot of references from people that are actually qualified, because once again, I am not qualified. And I have a psychology hyperfixation in a way about why people do things and are interested by things. And I think surrounding death and people's thoughts and feelings around that is literally one of my biggest hyperfixations in life. One of my first and last thoughts every single day is about death. But like, I'm goth, so I think it's okay, but like the thought process for people is just so, it's like there's like a worm in my head about it. Beyond the obvious ethic issues of murder and or videotaping murder, I think the biggest, which someone's gonna be like, you're so insane for even saying this, and whatever, pop off in the comments about how insane I am, you guys always do. I think the biggest thing is the whole like consent. Which obviously you can't give consent to be murdered or videotaped or what happens post-mortem. And I think that's a big part of why there is such, you know, the issue surrounding this stuff existing in the way it exists, and, you know, is because there is no consent with it. As well as it's been a vast multitude of issues on shock sites since the start with Rotten, all the way to the ends of Live Leak and Best Gore, of family members or loved ones of the deceased having to contact, send cease and desist to take down photos and videos and images of their loved one's body post-mortem, or even the death of their loved one on film and camera. And that is its own, you know, absolutely horrible thing to have happen. The intake of content like this will dehumanize people to the person watching over time. In my personal opinion, there's absolutely no doubt about that. This takes part in what I mentioned with the viewpoints, the first viewpoint of a moral gaze. When these forums existed, you would find a mass amount of people joking or mocking what was taking place, as well as the concept of the hierarchy, in which you will find different types of comments and reactions based on what the video pertains to. Most times when you saw a sewer slide video, there would be a lot of mocking, whereas when it was some sort of medical situation that was being drawn out that didn't need to, you would have people saying that this was torture and that they should essentially help this individual out of the situation. But then there would be people explicitly joking on cartel and torture videos. It is like just such a wild thought process of what levels are okay around certain things depending on the content. More importantly, what I would find is who was in the content. Outside of the hierarchy of what can be deemed humorous and what cannot be humorous, we can't ignore the fact that the majority of the content on these sites are coming out of non-Western society and cultures, and even at times third world countries where these people are far more at risk and vulnerable. There is, of course, white Americans and their deaths on these sites, but without a doubt, they are considered the minority when it comes to the type of things on these sites. Like, as I just mentioned very briefly, cartel videos are an extremely large fixture, as well as an Islamic terrorist group within their residing countries. And I think that, without a doubt, does play a part in some individuals' mockery of videos and people. At times, it can be felt like it was more acceptable to joke about what was happening to people in these videos because of what culture or country they were in, or even what that person identified as it was seen multiple times. If there was a sewer slide video and someone in the video was known to be a gay individual, you would see slurs being thrown around relentlessly. People who were on this earth that laughed, cried, loved, created, will become boiled down to the cause of their death, referred to as the X video or the guy who went blank. They leave with no identity anymore. And even with that entire everything, as I'm discussing with you right now, I myself am finding myself not morally and ethically sound by discussing and or educating you on these sites and these contents and the things that happened. And I do find the awareness in that completely, and the, once again, weird complexity and situations surrounding topics and instances like this. Things become really difficult, and that's why ethics and morals are constantly flowing and fluctuating, and it is different person to person. It is very extremely situational to a degree, like in the most layman's terms, the trolley situation. I just don't want to sit here and, talk to you like falsely. Like, I am sitting here and I'm telling you all of this content that I obviously just had to spend literal days verifying, searching, researching, as I sit here and denounce people that consume this content, why I, in part, just spent so much time consuming this content, and now you yourself are consuming it via me. So I am now this, pyramid scheme level of spreading this entire whole morally unethical situation surrounding shock contents and their sites. I am a victim to my own morbid curiosities and things that surround my life that have happened that have led me to the path of this. And, it's a weird spot to be in. But again, I've touched on it a few times. Death is I quote unquote refer to myself as death obsessed, because it is just something that has plagued me my entire life. It is something that has been the biggest pillar and focal point and entity in my entire existence, and it leads to my utter fascination. I am so curious. It is a disgusting issue, and as someone who saw stuff like this when I was really young, it absolutely formed part of my brain in a way we'll probably never understand. And I know so many people, especially people who watch my content, who've had the exact same thing happen as well. So I wanted to talk about this. It's something I have a morbid fascination with. And, does that put me in the moral gray area? And even for some people, makes me not morally sound and makes me unethical. Yes, but it is also just, I don't know. It's something I just really fixate on to a degree. Again, I do not watch this type of content. Again, I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to yuck yums in a way, but I don't watch this stuff anymore. Again, it was forced onto me, which, whatever. But I don't watch this stuff. I'm not promoting you watching this stuff. I personally don't think this is good for people to watch and consume, and we literally don't know the psychological repercussions of it. That is period point blank what I am saying to you. And that's also why I was contemplating discussing the current standing ClearNet sites surrounding gore. Because there are still sites to this day, and they're not hard to find. Like, it's not a secret. Like, they're not ever gonna be where they were back in this day, but like, they're still standing, and I have chosen to actually omit that entire chunk of the video, because I feel like that's just me promoting you watching it, but there are still some really nasty websites and people online. I mean, the diet version, Reddit 50/50 is still around, so you know, Reddit is still gross, but Reddit's always going to be gross one way or another, isn't it? But that was a deep dive into shock sites. Thanks so much for watching. If you watched this entire video, oh my god, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Follow me on other social media platforms at Darby Valentines, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Those are my main ones. I'm very active on all those platforms, so make sure to follow me there. And with that, one simple question. How do you feel about shock sites and shock content? Please make sure to let me know down below. I genuinely want this to be a point of discussion because, you know, some people have really fond nostalgic memories surrounding Rotten, and like, as I stated, best gore documentaries genuinely are one of the biggest reasons this entire channel exists as a whole. So, you know, if you have any memories or anything or feelings, opinions surrounding shock content and or sites, please make sure to let me down below. And once again, thanks so much for watching. Members on the channel see videos earlier. If you want to be a member, the link's down below. Members do mean the most. Once again, thanks for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Subscribe, goddammit. If you like this video, you might like my video about a deep dive into extreme horror. And with that, I will see you next time. Bye!